Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome to another edition of the Student Ministry Matters podcast. My name's Dan Carson. I'm your host as we continue the conversation about student ministry on today's podcast. Now, tonight we have a very special podcast as we hear from one of the leading experts in church revitalization. But before we get to that, I want to thank our podcast sponsor, Central Baptist College of Conway, Arkansas. If you're looking for a great school for your students, Central Baptist College is the place that you need to point them to. It's a Christ-centered education where a student's relationship with Jesus is priority. Now, to find out more about Central Baptist College, visit cbc.edu. There you'll find contact information on how you can see more of CBC for yourself. Recently, I made the trip to Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary again to enjoy my next doctoral seminar. I knew that it was going to be a special one because of the instructor. But as we went along, I knew that I wanted to sit down with him and share a conversation about church revitalization and student ministry. Our guest for the day is Dr. Tom Cheyney, known by many as the father of church revitalization. Dr. Cheyney serves the Greater Orlando Baptist Association as their Executive Director of Missions. Dr. Cheyney is a nationally recognized conference leader in church revitalization, church planting, and church health. He's taught on 5 continents and is an Oxford University Distinguished Scholar student from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's married to Cheryl, and they have 2 adult children, Ashley and Drew. Dr. Cheyney is also the founder and directional leader of the Renovate National Church Revitalization Conferences and leader of the Renovate Church Revitalization Coaching Network, where he mentors pastors, churches, and directors of missions in church revitalization and renewal. He serves as the executive editor of the Church Revitalizer magazine, which is the only national publication on church revitalization in North America. Now, Dr. Cheyney has written over 5,000 print and audio resources. He serves as an adjunct professor at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City and Anderson University in South Carolina, where he teaches at the doctoral level for church revitalization seminars. Now, in addition to being a church planter and pastor, Dr. Cheyney began his ministry experience as a youth pastor. Well, thanks for being on the podcast with me today, Tom. Before we dive into our conversation today, would you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and about your ministry?
Well, my name's Tom Cheyney. I am originally from the northeast portion of the United States. Was born in just south of Baltimore in a little town called Cecilton, Maryland. Eventually, my father moved to Florida for the building boom of the 60s and grew up on the west coast of Florida. Came to know the Lord when I was a snotty-nosed 13-year-old. Thank God, a Christian coach that was part of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes just introduced me to Jesus, shared the plan of salvation, and that day, June 16th, 1972, as a result of him taking me to a camp, I came to know the Lord Jesus Christ and gave my heart to him as Savior and Lord. So I grew up in Naples. I was a blonde-haired, blue-eye, jock down in Naples, and God all of a sudden got a hold of my heart and told me it was his desire to go into ministry and to serve him. And, I'm 64 years old, so I've been doing that for some time.
That's great. As a podcast for student ministers and student ministry workers, was there someone during that 13 to 18 year age that really kind of poured into your life?
Yeah, there were a couple people. The first one was a Christian coach of my high school, Naples High School, named Rich Harrelson. He was the leader of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes huddle. It was a Sunday afternoon, evening type huddle where we would show up at the school and we would, do some recreational sports, have a sermon preached, and, him do one-on-one as a result of his just pouring into us over the year. Eventually, he took us to camp where we went to an actual Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp, and it was just a Christian camp week-long for athletes and that. But then there were other coaches as well. There were other individuals. My Sunday school teacher, a guy named Jerry Deason, who was a dentist, he just kept pouring into all of us young boys, and that poor man had to put up with a lot. But for some, Jerry was uncool to a lot of people, but he was cool to us because he loved us despite us, and he just kept showing the love of Jesus to a bunch of kids that, in some ways people today would say we were from the other side of the track. We didn't know how to act like church because we weren't church people. And he not only loved us, but he showed us how to act and how to grow in the Lord, and he just poured the word into our hearts.
Well, I love hearing the stories. I mean, it's during those pivotal years that students latch onto their beliefs for a lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's so important to reach them before they get out of the house, basically, at 18. Well, you live in Orlando.
I'm suffering for Jesus in Orlando, Florida, yes.
So let me ask, because you got a lot of listeners that are youth pastors or youth guys or young at heart. Let me put it that way.
That'll work.
Which of the big amusement parks do you like the most?
Well, I would say Walt Disney World, and in Walt Disney World, it's all the Disneys. I would say, besides the Magic Kingdom, which is everybody's fantasy place, I love Animal Kingdom, which is where all the animals are. And my wife and I, we have season passes, so we go early so we can see the animals when they're awake and active instead of hiding under a tree. So those would be the fun places. They're all good. I mean, whether it's Universal or whether it's SeaWorld, whether it's Busch Gardens over toward Tampa, they're all great. But that's always been our favorite. Even when my wife and I, Cheryl, my wife, and I were dating, I was the youth minister in Delray Beach, Florida. We would try to find days where we could roll out early, get to Disney, roll back late, and just have a great time. So we're big Disney World people.
Well, as I found out this week, you were involved in student ministry early in your ministry. So what general advice would you have for those involved in youth ministry today as they seek to work with students and impact that next generation for Jesus?
I would say two things. The first thing I would say is today's successful youth ministers are those that can they're able to recruit others. They have the ability to recruit adults who will help in the organization, and growing youth ministries, whether it's a junior high and senior high, or whether it's two separate junior high and then a senior high, youth ministers that can recruit volunteers to be part of the program is the most important thing. You love the kids, certainly, you do things, but kids need structure, and they need enough people around to love on them, and having the ability to develop a team. Youth ministers that do it all by themselves, often it burns them out, and you'll be less effective with the kids. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is there is a potential danger in youth ministry, and I know because I've been a youth minister. My son's been a youth minister, very successful in for both of us in that regard. Too many youth ministers create a youth ghetto. A youth ghetto is where the kids are only happy if they're hanging out with other kids. They're only happy if they're with the junior hires, and they're only happy if they're with the senior hires. And if junior hires come in with the senior hires hate it because the junior hires. And if a youth minister allows that type of stuff to go on, he's creating specifically age group ghettos where they don't put the sign up, but the sign says, "Adults, you are not welcome." And nothing is more dangerous for a young child, a youth, development as a middle schooler and as a high schooler to kind of all of a sudden push adults out of their life. And one of the great dangers today is, the youth minister does it all, and he may not intentionally even realize he's doing it, but he creates a youth ghetto where, it is a separation from family. It's a separation from older people. And those young kids, as I did, thank God for a Rich Harrison. Thank God for a Jerry Deason. Thank God that our youth minister allowed those type of people to filter into our lives. And I think I'm better grounded because of it.
It's real easy for that to happen. It's real easy. You have the youth that maybe they meet on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, or in a lot of churches, they'll actually have a youth worship service.
During the other worship service.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you end up with segregation. And as somebody who has not only worked with student ministry, but family ministry, I hate to hear that because I want to see that integration.
And, I always wanted to have the youth in the main worship services. I chose to have a youth worship on another day of the week. It was during the time when Barry St. Clair was doing things called Impact Ministry. And so we would have what we call Impact. It was a Friday night from 7 to 10. It was, the once a week youth kind of youth rally on steroids,
right.
Type thing. And it was facilitated by a lot of adults helping to make it happen. So you can still have those type of things, but I don't think you need to as a youth minister. In fact, I know you don't need to say as a youth minister, I need to preach to them because they're not getting that. That scares me that one day those kids are going to graduate from high school and go off to college. Yeah. And if you segregated them into the youth ghetto, they will never find a church that they like. And what will happen is when they go to college, they will shift out of church because they've never learned how to participate in a different style of church.
Yeah. I've had the opportunity to be here. I'm at Midwestern this week with Dr. Cheyney and with, just some other students and learning and growing in this area. And I do know I'm supposed to call you Tom on this.
I know it's hard when you got to call me something else.
It is. But, church revitalization is, of course, the topic that's important to you, and it's grown to be important.
Hugely important,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's grown important to me over the years. It's led me to work on this next phase of my education here at Midwestern. So what convinced you that is your thing, your quote-unquote thing?
I fell into it by being successful in helping others. It wasn't like I said, because I started my pastoral ministry, moving away from youth as a church planter. But more and more as I was planting churches, I'd have pastors that were in trouble come to me and ask me, how can I fix this? How can this be done? And before I knew it, my heart and my passion became on helping the church that was plateaued, helping the church that was declined. I wasn't into the what I call build the bigger is better type of ministry. I was into let's save the church. And a lot of churches get in trouble, and if they don't wait too long, they can be turned around and be revitalized. And gosh, as early as 1993, 1995, the Lord was already allowing me to do those things. And so for a while, I was doing my regular job as a church planter and working across the nation, helping church plants and doing this on the weekends and on time off and all of that. And before I knew it, God just got a hold of my heart and said, this is what I want you to do. Now, where I live in Orlando, I serve as the executive director of the Greater Orlando Baptist Association, 275 churches in Central Florida that, I help and work with and, part of the thing. And there's a degree of those that need to be revitalized. So besides leading and helping healthy churches and planting new churches, I have a built-in lab right where we are,
That's exciting.
And you have been part of that lab. Renovate One Day trainings. You actually, I think you told me I was offering a free book download one day, and
yes, was it.
That's how you first did that. But we train local pastors and pastors all across the nation in how to revitalize their church, and people come in and watch us via Zoom, or people come live into our presence where we host it with Dr. Ron Smith at Waterstone Church. And, before we knew it, something I was just going to do for the locals expanded, and then renovate national conferences, which are the big conferences with people from all over the world coming. That's kind of was the byproduct of more people wanted to know what we were doing, and let's spend 3 intense days together. Kind of sounds like a doctoral seminar,
It
but
does.
anyway, but 3 intense days together working and practicing on the work of church revitalization and renewal. So that's kind of the background. I've had a lot of friends. God's been really very, very good to us. He's allowed us to create a magazine called the Church Revitalizer magazine, which is the largest magazine on the subject. It may even be the only magazine on it. I'm not really sure on that. I never really took time to count and check that out. But it literally helps pastors learn the things they can do to help bring about revitalization in their churches.
That's exciting. Well, as youth ministers and youth pastors, we're often the second man in our churches.
Yes, you are.
We don't make the final decisions and don't have the opportunity to lead out at times. If we see that our church is in need of revitalization, what can we do in that second chair role to facilitate steps towards revitalization?
Well, I would say the first thing, when you are not the guy, he who takes the shot calls the shot.
Right.
And there are a lot of shots levied at pastors today. So the one who gets the ball thrown at him is also the one who gets to call the play. But when you sit in that second chair, the first thing you can do to be thinking about revitalization is begin to develop ways that the church can become healthier in particular areas. You may not be responsible for 52 quality Sundays in a year, but you could begin to beef up the prayer ministry of the local church. You could participate and develop ways that your organization could be part of the outreach effort of the church. Revitalization, because it's a minimal investment of 1,000 days, which is a 3-year, 3 years to get it really launching and going, another 2 years to really probably fully achieve it. You, as the second chair, you can come alongside your pastor, do the things that he may be too busy, too overworked on the things he has, and you may be able to take one piece toward revitalization, accomplish that. And I call them nudges. You can slowly nudge churches toward a revitalization mindset. You're married, I'm married. If ever a preacher's talking and I'm guilty of what the preacher said, you know what I get? I get a nudge in my ribs.
That's right.
Listen, hon, he's talking about you. Churches need those nudges as well. And so those would be, revitalization is better to be steady and careful than to be racing all over the place. And I would begin to raise the level of this is something we could consider. And I'd make sure I'd be talking to the pastor about what you're learning and all of that, because there's so many churches across the Western Hemisphere that are in need of revitalization that probably only about 10%, and maybe even a little less than 10% of the churches in the Western Hemisphere are what we would really call healthy churches.
That's a sad
It's a sad reality, isn't it?
It is.
So no matter how good things are, we probably have some systems that are broken that need to be fixed.
Right.
And I'd analyze the systems. How's your assimilation systems? How's your outreach follow-up from visitor? There's always things that could be improved upon.
Excellent. Well, as a podcast towards student ministry and student ministry workers, what importance or role does youth ministry play in the revitalization of churches?
Well, it's funny. I have some guys that don't think that you can revitalize a church through youth ministry, and just they don't believe that can be done. And yet I have seen youth ministers across the nation, when they begin to energize their kids, their youth, and youth starts taking a greater role in service, whether it's servicing in programs or facilitating in ministries, ushering, greeting, offering, working in the nursery, doing, all of a sudden youth have the ability, because they usually have boundless energy. We had that one day, but we don't know where it went, but it left. And I say youth can give synergy to the effort. They can't lead it, but they certainly can be part of the, let's go, take the world for Jesus. And one of the ways in my youth ministry, I was a youth minister in 3 churches, and we used to be actively involved in outreach. We would, a family came, realistically, we really didn't care about mom and dad. We just wanted to know where they lived so we could go visit the kids,
Right.
Type thing. And so our youth would visit with adults to the other kids, and that's another way, a youth ministry can be very aggressive toward bringing others in. But I would say the youth ministry has to be inclusive, not exclusive. And
right.
It's got to be one where you have those kids that when a new person comes, they do everything they can to kind of swallow those kids and welcome those kids and help them realize this is a safe place for you. And so those are some of the things that you could do as a youth ministry.
I have a student who just graduated, and it pains my heart that she's graduated and moving off to college about 4 hours away, because she is that person.
Yeah.
She brings energy and excitement. She's inclusive. It's just going to...
I would ask her, who did you prepare before you left?
Exactly. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, let's say I'm a church revitalizer and I realize that a youth pastor is needed for that spot, for that church. What am I looking for in a student ministry guy there?
Well, if you're a pastor that's beginning to revitalize a church and you function as the church revitalizer, you must look for a youth minister that is outwardly focused, that isn't just interested in his little group, but he's interested in the greater realm of the church, the greater health of the church. Though his assignment is youth ministry and raising up the youth ministry, he's also thinking about, systems of assimilation. How can I help the greater church in this a system of how do we reach new people? How do we get into the community? Kids are a great army. Saturation Saturday, for example, kids, you build bags and, you basically minister on a saturation evangelism day where a certain grid in the community, and they can help you, blitz an area in a couple, 2-3 hours. And, whereas in some churches in revitalization, the church may be a little older and the elderly can't do that.
Right.
But, youth group, they have young legs. They have great spirits. It's very seldom do you see a person when you knock on a door as a young person, they don't answer the door and say hello.
That's right.
Yeah, I learned that early in using my youth. Our youth used to be some of the most active people in the visitation and outreach ministry of our churches because, our deacons would love them. They're like, well, let me go visit with one of those youth. They were that good. They were that good.
Oh, well, Dr. Cheyney, and I did it again. Tom, I'm so thankful that you are been on the podcast with me today. I've got a couple of questions to wrap up. One, if you are interested in church revitalization, and this has become something that you want to learn more about or look into, I know you've written a number of books. What would you say would be that beginning place for someone? What one of your books would you be that starting point?
If you're starting to think, am I a revitalizer? Am I a pastor that could be working on revitalizing a particular church? It's not the first book I've written. It's way back in the list. But there's a book I wrote a few years ago called The Church Revitalizer as Change Agent. And it was written for the pastor who's asking the question, am I the guy?
Okay.
Am I wired? See, there are pastors that are wired to be, pastors of ongoing congregations that are healthy and help them go to the next level. There are pastors that are called to be church planters, and all of those are good. But God wires some of us to be the guy that could take a plateaued, kind of stuck, or an unhealthy church and begin to bring renewal to it. And the book was written in a way that, helping them see how God has wired them, that they could be the guy. They could be the pastor, that the person, the individual, who would be the one who begins to bring about revitalization to a stuck or plateaued or declining church.
Thank you.
So that would be it. And you can get that at renovateconference.org. When you go to the site, look bookstore, or you can just go to Amazon and type in that name, or type in my spelling of my name if you spell it right, and it will come out.
Well, we will be sure to put that in the show notes so that our listeners have an opportunity to just go straight to it. That's important to us. But, well, again, thank you, Tom, for being on the podcast. If someone wants to learn more about Renovate or to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way is go to renovateresources.com or renovateconference.org, and there will be a place there to leave a message, leave a note. You can find out everything about revitalization and how we could help and come along that. That's probably the very best way to it. There's a place where you can drop a note and leave a note and all of that. And though I may not be able to handle it immediately that day, I do eventually handle all of them.
Again, thank you so much, Tom.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
You may be in a church that needs revitalization. Your youth group may be down to just a couple of students, but let me encourage you today. Don't give up. Don't lose hope, because student ministry matters.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students, because the work matters.